Welcome to the Cinematologists podcast. I'm Dario Linares, as usual, and I'm here with one of our returning champions, Savina Petkova.
Yes,
hello, Savina.
Savina here. Hi, Dario.
For the second time.
Yes, it's our second take.
So we were just debating whether we were going to let you know that we've done this intro. So this is the intro to our 2 LFF episodes that will be coming up. But we've done this intro once already, but had a technical failure. In fact, I'm going to check. Right, I'm looking at my thing. Say something.
I am saying something.
Okay, right, okay. Wait, we should be
just
recording.
double checking, being super careful.
I can't tell you how much good tape was lost yesterday, but we're going to do it again. Yeah, we've done, as people know, we've done this last year. We've done Berlin in the past. Neil's done Cannes, so it's great to be back at one of the big festivals, but not one of the premiere ones in Europe. I don't know. What do you think about that, Savina?
No, there's not that many premieres happening, and obviously the awards here only go to first-time filmmakers. These kind of new opportunities that are given on this kind of festival. Yeah. But at the same time, we have almost 200 titles this year, which is a lot.
Yeah. It's funny with. You know, you've got the big three in tennis, Djokovic, Federer and Nadal. It's kind of like that with European festivals.
It
is. Cannes, Berlin and Venice. And London is the Andy Murray of festivals. It's not quite at that level. But, you know, we're going to do this in a fairly unedited way. So Savina has very kindly agreed to be co-host and producer. So she's going to send us some, a little monologue
goodies,
thoughts and reviews, but also some big interviews. So that's great to have her on board for that. But also, we're going to catch up and talk about various things that we've seen together as well and put it all together and we'll see what comes out at the end. But I mean, I wanted to start off by asking you about, doing the London Film Festival, because I always find when I go to Berlin, it's always nice to be kind of outside of your normal routine and just bombing around the different cinemas. And in London, I feel like I never really get into that film festival mode. It's back to work and it's going home and stuff. I don't know, did you feel the same?
It's quite an interesting time of the year because you have the festival life converging with your normal life and they overlap geographically and chronologically as well, and that makes it quite disorienting for people who have busy lives, of course, and also do film writing or film reviewing or podcasting of film on the side. So I think on the one way it takes something away from the experience because it's not as exclusive. It doesn't feel like you're giving the full attention it deserves, but at the same time there can be a little bit of more adrenaline here and there because it's not every day that you can just rock up to the Odeon Leicester Square at 8 a.m. on a Saturday or a Sunday before anyone is there and just watch a film in the huge auditorium, a film that not many people have seen yet. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no real grounds for any complaints about being able to go to a film festival.
And yet we always complain.
But to be fair, the organisation does seem better this year, just in terms of the press and industry screenings and the fact that we don't have to sit around on our asses for 45 minutes, getting cold and what have you. They've introduced this token system, which seems a lot better.
Not an old-fashioned queue anymore, which would have you rounding up Soho, the Prince Charles Cinema 3 times before you can get into the screening, which is a very, very good development, I think, this year. Everything seems well taken care of, and there's a lot of volunteers helping out, and they've also opened up the festival to newer venues, as well as keeping the big one from last year, the South Bank Center, for the big screenings and gala premieres. So I like that setup, to be fair. Yeah,
it's really huge, isn't it, London? Because it's over previous weeks as well, before the actual festival starts.
It's a 4-week festival for the press and industry.
Did you get to see much in the pre-warm-up bit, in the press and industry screenings?
That's the thing. I've always tried and go to more and the weeks before it actually gets hectic, but this year not really. I came to see only a couple of films. That was my take, unfortunately. What about you?
Yeah, I haven't seen anything live, but there's a few things I've seen on the digital platform. But I'm going to save that for later because I kind of want to round up what I've seen digitally in home and sort of talk about the differences of seeing something at home rather than going to the cinema. And again, we've just come out of Odeon Leicester Square, seeing Inarritu's movie, but we need to let that percolate. That is just a monster that I need to wrestle with a little bit. I don't know.
Or is it a little kitten pretending to be a lion and roar at you? We don't know yet.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with that movie, but I need a bit of time. But yeah, I do want to talk about the two movies that we discussed yesterday, because it was the first two that I'd seen, on purpose, that I'd read about, and I was like, yeah, I want to see these movies. But the first one, maybe we could talk about the film that we saw together in the afternoon, Blue Jean.
Yes, let's talk about Blue Jean, this gorgeous addition to the new British canon.
Yeah, I mean, this is a movie that was set in the 1980s. It's a first feature from Georgia Oakley and stars Rosie McEwen, who, to me, had an unerring kind of similarity to Nicole Kidman from various angles. I couldn't get over it. She looks exactly the same. Well, Nicole Kidman from a few years ago, let's say.
Yeah, probably about 15, 20 years ago, I would say.
And the thing that really struck me about this, and I mean, we had a long discussion yesterday how I really liked it, and you were less sold on it, but I think we both agreed that the kind of the production design, the setting in the 80s, the authenticity of that in Thatcher's 80s, with this lesbian character who's essentially a teacher, but is not closeted, but is in her day-to-day life is kind of passing or not letting anybody know, because there is this the Conservative government under Thatcher is trying to put forward this law which bans the promotion of homosexuality in schools. So she feels kind of compromised by this and is unable to kind of reveal what her identity is in the school, obviously. But then she's got a friendship group outside, and she goes to this collective and got a girlfriend, and I found it really believable. That world was just really well represented and articulated. I found the central character really strong. But we were discussing, weren't we? I'm sorry to keep going back in the past tense. We were discussing how that sense of her experience and her life, maybe you read that slightly differently.
I think while watching it, maybe I had a slight problem with maybe a feature of the writing. I'm not sure. It feels like there was more potential that was left unexplored in some way. That was my immediate response while watching the film.
Yeah.
But just talking about it and thinking about it afterwards, I kept returning to some visuals that sometimes worked, sometimes they didn't. The film was all drenched in harsh but also alluring realism, as you mentioned, of the 80s, and it had this green, bluish, very cold-hued palette, which changed exactly at the very, very last scene, when the sun was finally allowed to come in and illuminated everything to a brighter blue and white. And I really liked this transition, but it came so late in the film. But yeah, the thing that I found interesting and also maybe struggled a little bit with was this adherence to realism, plus layered on that the point of view and narration, which was never revealed as a first-person narration in any case. And we didn't have lots of psychological cues about the inner life of the protagonist. We could just deduce them from her doings and her behavior here and there. But there was a strong sense of subjectivity, which was captured very well in the ambience of the film and the aura of this homophobic times.
Sure.
That made me think that, this is the world that protagonist sees it, the way that protagonist sees it. It's not the objective world of the 80s, but it's a very personal account of the 80s, of this lesbian woman who is struggling to navigate her own tensions of belonging, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think it wouldn't surprise me if this was shot in 16mm and then blown up, because it was very grainy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it did have that feeling, just in, as you say, the washed out color palette of a kind of stilted 80s environment. And what's interesting is it did use some of the kind of musical cues. There were sort of queer anthems, let's say, in some of these in some of these sort of party sequences where she's with her gay friends, but it wasn't sort of overtly labored, that I didn't think. What was really interesting to me was the depiction of the school and the school gym, and these sort of wooden floors that I remember back in the day, because I grew up in the 1980s. It was I just found it completely authentic, and the clothes, the cars, all of the production design was just really kind of drew me in. And I felt that her subjectivity, because I think that a lot of the film, as you say, aesthetically, it was using certain cues and certain devices to show that she was like in a goldfish bowl. There's one scene with an actual goldfish bowl. She's got this lovely cat,
white, gorgeous fluffy cat,
and it's trying to get in the goldfish and in the goldfish bowl, and the goldfish is kind of swimming around, and it's clearly symbolic of her being in this situation where all of the people around her are commenting on what we hear on like radio and TV reports in the background about this law about homosexuality being prohibited in schools. And then we get, like muffled, the sort of muffled sound, which signifies the idea that the lead character is kind of submerged in these thoughts. And I really felt that worked for me, apart from the moments where they went into these dream sequences that I thought was ill-advised. When it kept in the kind of realist mode, but it was all her experiences, I thought that was fine.
It's a really interesting layer, I think, of reality and subjectivity, which is rarely made to look so seamless. Yeah. That's why maybe I was a bit confused while watching it, because I was yearning for more subjectivity, and I was looking at the body and her body, because especially in queer themed films, I'm more inclined to have a ready depicted struggle that takes place on the character's body in some way. But since the film steered away from that on purpose, I was a bit taken aback. But I think this says more about my own prejudice in watching these kinds of films, unfortunately. So that's why I kept thinking about it after we finished the viewing.
Yeah, I think that the thing is interesting in the years since the Thatcher era. I'm not going to say that things are how things are for gay people. Let's put it that way, being somebody who's straight. But you would say looking back from 2022 that things have gotten a lot better. However, I think that sense of experiences being dictated to you by outside culture is still very real. That's something that hasn't gone away. It's just happens in different ways, perhaps. And people still struggle to be out to their family. There's these scenes where she's discussing with her sister, and
who has the scariest family ever. That was the cringiest moment for me watching this film, because it sent me into such a spiral. It's just the nightmare of the British upper middle class. I think it's so scary to watch, with this man and a woman and their child who is so spoiled, in their tightly arranged home, which looks so lifeless, and it was not even a caricature. It seemed like that would be quite desirable for so many people, but because it was juxtaposed with the main protagonist, so it felt like it's a trap that the main protagonist doesn't want to see herself in anyway. Yeah. And very conveniently at that point, we learn by a throwaway comment that she was married to a man before in her life. And thankfully, this is not discussed more in any more detail, her previous life, because to her, it doesn't matter anymore. So in that sense, I also see the subjective point of view here coming at play, because for the viewer, it might be interesting. For the straight viewer, I guess, lots of straight viewers would think, oh, why? And they ask these kind of questions that maybe it's not your place to ask anyway. So I'm happy that the film didn't go to the obvious places at all.
And I suppose we should say that the whole kind of moral dilemma of the film is sort of provoked by the arrival of a student. And there is this sort of sense of, well, for me anyway, it was kind of like, oh, I hope this film doesn't fall down a cliche that looks like it's going to happen. Thankfully, it didn't. But it does present a different and interesting sort of twist on the idea of the main character making a moral decision or not. Yeah. And actually, the sense of having to be kind of selfish in order to preserve your own status in mainstream or straight culture, and the decisions that gay people have had to make in terms of their friends or people that they meet in order to secure that position. And I think that's the kind of crux of the film. I mean, I wouldn't say it resolves it, but I don't think it actually it didn't need to, or didn't even try to really resolve it in a sense. Although I would say, and I think we agreed on this, that it ended a scene too late. There was a previous scene that it should have just cut to black, and that would have been a great ambiguous ending.
We really, really love the party sequence at the last 10 minutes in the film, which works so well because it doesn't say a lot. It's not a very wordy, verbose sequence. It just lets the characters speak with their looks and their gazes and their tears in their eyes, and just keeps the expression tethered to this unspoken understanding that we just carry on.
Yeah.
We fuck up, we do stuff, then we just go on. And I found that really invigorating and refreshing. I really,
Nobody's
really like that.
100% morally pure. Everybody makes compromises all the time.
That's the thing. It's a film about responsibility in many ways. Responsibility to yourself, to your peers, to the people that come after you, to your students. Being an example or not setting an example or choosing not to set an example. And these are quite important, nuanced questions that the film does handle with care.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it definitely does. And I saw it got a couple of 3-star reviews, and I think, it's not, don't get me wrong, I think it's got a little bit of the first feature about it.
For sure, yeah.
It's worth checking out, I think. And again, it's BBC funded, isn't it? So it has something of that ilk about it. And, somebody's trying to make a film that is a first movie, but also says something. And I think it manages that. And
definitely, but it makes me more excited to see what she comes up with next. I'm absolutely in waiting.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about another film then that I saw this on the digital platform. And you've seen this previously.
Yes, and I remember telling you to see something that is on the digital platform that I think you would like.
Yeah.
And it so happens that you already saw it.
It was the first one I watched. So
that was a pretty good choice,
yes,
I think.
Indeed, very serendipitous, I think. So this is the film called Unrest by Cyril Schäublin.
Cyril Schäublin, please.
Schäublin. Okay, I always get my pronunciations wrong, so I apologize to Cyril. But I think to say, first of all, you've got a piece coming out in Film Comment about this, and you've interviewed the director, right?
Yes, I had the huge pleasure to interview him, and we talked for a long time about so many things, because this film does provoke so many thoughts. That's why I sought him out in the first place. I just felt like I really need to talk to him about his film, and thankfully he agreed, and that was lovely. And the film itself stuck with me for so long. I saw it in July, kept thinking about it months and months and months, and even I knew that its glory, in one way, its aura preceded my viewing of it as well, because it did win an award in Berlin upon its premiere, the really, really cool Encounters section. So it seems like it's a vital voice of contemporary cinema. It's a Swiss filmmaker, and it's his second film, which is quite different in content, but very similar in visual style to his first film, which is called Those Who Are Fine. It's relatively shorter. It's about 70-minute long. And it's set in the present, where this one is set in the past.
Yeah, that's right. So the film's about a Russian polymath anarchist called Pyotr Kropotkin. And this is a real historical figure who was a scientist, a geologist, but ended up being, a quite
philosopher as well,
an outspoken anarchist, really, and critic of I don't know what you call the advances of modernism and their effect on people in terms of a social sense, but also the ways in which modernist working practices has an impact on individuals,
the workers.
Yeah, the workers' rights, but also their very lives. So this guy Kropotkin then he's taking a geological survey of this Swiss town called Saint-Imier. But this town is absolutely structured, I think it's the right word, around the watch factory at its center. And we start by getting these very intense, precise close-ups of these workers who essentially, what you would call, quote unquote, as factory workers, but they're doing this absolutely technically difficult work in putting these watches together, right? And then you start to discover slowly but surely that the whole of the factory, and then indeed the whole of the town, is defined by the mechanization of time and space and labor. And it's just amazing, this film, because like me describing it there, I can't really get across to you how much it sort of draws you in. It sounds like this is a film about watching people make watches in a Swiss factory and then a bit of anarchism. You're kidding me. But it's absolutely superb.
I find that it's very difficult to describe this film without giving away its charm in a way, because I can say a lot about how I felt watching it, how surprised I was to be drawn in, how taken aback I was by the wordiness of the dialogue there and the monologues as well, because they're also delivered in a more automaton kind of way.
That's right, yeah.
And there's a lot of words and a lot of particular things that are very specific to either criticism of Marx and Engels, anarchist definitions, how the anarchist communities work around the world, who needs more money, the comrades in Boston who are having a strike and we're going to send them this amount of money.
It's very internationalist in the politics and stuff.
Yeah, and it's actually true. This is where this big anarchist community was formed as almost a center for the global anarchist community at the time. Pretty amazing. In the super small town tucked in the Jura Mountains, right?
Sure. But then that's kind of like counterpost, or that becomes the underlying sort of story, when on the surface the people who work in this factory, then they are bound by this sort of shaping of temporal rules. So the idea of time as being a constructed thing is something that the film, really sort of focuses on, and the ways in which the lives of the people there are dictated to, in such precise terms. And they've got like these 4 variations of time, which is so weird to get your head around.
This is, the film takes place in 1877, and that's well before the establishment of standardized time, right? Yep. So that's why they have 4 types of time, and they differ by a few minutes, by a few seconds, and they always have to recalibrate them again and again. And recalibrate all the clocks manually to make sure that none of them is falling behind. And I found that also fascinating to watch, because it's just so ridiculous.
There's a great scene when the train time breaks down and they have an argument about which time they will go on to.
What should we do
like
now?
The postal time or the church time. It's hilarious. But what it does is it makes you sort of realize just how much the way that we, in modernist terms, we sequentialize our existence, using seconds and hours and days and all of that, is something that is imposed on us. It's not a natural thing, and that's so fascinating. And then, as you say, the actors, who a lot of them are non-professional actors, they deliver their lines in this very automaton kind of way, and they're treated in the factory as just, obviously, puppets for this production line of these watches. But everything that kind of encroaches on their very being. So one of the workers is carted off to prison because they're late, essentially, and
losing time, losing money,
losing time. Yeah, exactly, and hiding these things and. Not the way that the rest of her co-workers kind of treat her is like, okay, we'll see you after 3 weeks in prison. You can carry on doing your work there. And what I found really fascinating about it was a very, on the outside, a very sort of experimental kind of concept, but it's extremely watchable and extremely relevant. So it just reminds me of the way that we talk today about, Amazon workers having 5 minutes to go to the toilet and come back, otherwise they lose money and stuff like this. And it just, it's definitely saying something about today's society as much as it's saying something about, back in the late 19th century.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we talked with Cyril about this, and he put it very, in a very succinct way, saying that every film about the past is a film about the present. But I would also add to that, saying that lots of the films that are set in the past read as an allegory of the present, whereas this film, I don't think it uses the allegorical way of speaking at all.
No.
It's very submerged in its own context. It's very thoroughly researched and reconstructed and structured to feel both old in a way and also super relevant.
Yeah.
So I think the film is very watchable also because of that, because it manages to keep these two layers of past and present separate,
Yeah.
but also in close proximity to each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it reminded me of Ken Loach's period dramas, just in terms of the style and the tone and the way how it focuses on the working practices as much as the people themselves. And then you mentioned this the other day that photography is kind of like a key point as well about the arrival of photography and that how that defines history, but the way in which that becomes mythologized is so fascinating as well.
It's really great because photography is there as a new invention, but it's also an affordable invention, something that you can buy and make money out of. So it's already inscribed in this market economy. Yeah. So it's not the magical early days of photography anymore. Yeah. No, they are very tangible. So on the one hand, we have photographers taking pictures for advertisements for the watch factory, right? They want to sell more watches, so we're gonna take photos of the mountains for the catalogs that we're gonna send to our clients. And there's this beautifully funny sequences when someone walks into the shot and they have to stop him and say, oh no, you have to go around,
and the person says, I'm gonna lose 4 minutes
of my time to the factory. And then they're like, okay, no, you can go in, then it's fine. So everything is just negotiated again and again. But the question about framing and who's being in the frame, I think, is also quite important and quite interesting way to look up at both the film and photography. Where do you focus your attention, right? And the film itself puts the human figures never in its center. It's usually in the top right corner or bottom left, and it's a very unusual way of framing that draws attention to how constructed everything is, right? And I think that also contributes to the fact that the film is being playful with the past in a way that doesn't disregard it in any way. Yeah,
I mean, I just watching this, I thought, oh my God, Deleuzian film scholars are going to have a field day with this movie, and it's that kind. But it's not pretentious, I don't think, and it's very watchable.
No, I think it's so far off from pretentiousness that it makes me want to scream on the top of my lungs, everyone watch this movie. It's so exhilarating. And now it's in London. It's coming to New York Film Festival this week too.
To see if it gets a release in the UK.
I really hope so. I really do. It's going to be quite something.
Great. Well, thank you so much for doing that for the second time, Savina. I really appreciate it. And
my pleasure.
Podcasting Error 101. Hopefully that won't happen again. This afternoon I'm going to go see the Laura Poitras movie, but you're doing some writing, aren't you? Are you going to see something tomorrow?
Yes, tomorrow I'm seeing Women Talking.
Oh, okay, great. I'm going to go see Ennis Men in the morning, Jenks's movie. So yeah, we'll catch up with you very soon, and look forward to both of us making a few recordings from in and around the festival. See you soon.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Dear friend, I have arrived in the Swiss Jura Mountains. The valley is, with no doubt, the capital point of the International Anarchist Rotation Circle.
La nation, c'est un fantôme. Une société anarchiste existe toujours.
Puis en fait, c'était la première fois que les femmes aient gagné le même salaire comme les hommes.
Hey everyone, it's Dario here, as you can no doubt tell. Don't really know where to start with this short monologue. It's Wednesday evening, the 12th of October, and essentially the festival is kind of drawing to a close now. The press and industry screenings have more or less finished. The programme itself finishes, and then there's awards and the gala ending on Sunday, which I'm lucky enough to have a ticket to, so I'll try and get something from there. But this approach of trying to record a load of little snapshots from the festival over a week or so. It's really fallen down the toilet, to be honest with you. I mean, this has been a result of three different things, really. One, I've had 2 or 3 recordings fall through in terms of meeting up with people. Secondly, I've had 2 recordings which have technically gone wrong. Literally just this evening, I went to record something at the Picture House's bar to try and get a little bit of atmosphere into the audio. But that went wrong, technically. Some kind of connection on my from my computer to my microphone wasn't working. So I recorded that and that went wrong. So this is, again, a second attempt. And just the fact that, I'm working full time at the same time. So I've just been trying to drop in and out of screenings and be around the festival, whether it's at the BFI or Picture Houses or whatever. So it's kind of nobody's fault. It is what it is. It's not particularly a problem. I'm definitely hoping to get a couple of more interviews tomorrow. Savina has taped with Ruben Osland, which is great. I saw Triangle of Sadness just the other day and really enjoyed that, so looking forward to listening to that and having a chat to Savina about it. Definitely hoping to speak to Christine Molloy and Joe Lawler tomorrow about The Future Tense. It seems we always speak to them at the London Film Festival. I think we'll catch them at the BFI tomorrow, which is great. And also still hoping to catch Jenks too. And I've got a couple of other people that I'm hoping that I can talk to just about various films. The one thing I did want to talk about just now, because I don't know if I'd get another chance to speak about it, is the film that is possibly the best film I've seen so far, with a few more to go. And that is All the Beauty in the Bloodshed, which is the documentary by Laura Poitras of Citizen4 fame. Now, this is possibly, if it's not the best thing I've seen at the festival, it's kind of the most complete. And what does that actually mean? Well, it's a documentary that weaves together a focus on the life and radical photography of a world famous photographer called Nan Goldin. And she kind of came to fame during the late 70s and early 80s for her radical approach to showing the gay subcultures of New York. And, she was very influenced by and within the wave of what you might call radical or post-punk, or even punk, artists of the late 70s and 80s that existed during that in that context. So half of the film really is about an exploration of her work and her not just her process really, but what she's trying to do aesthetically and in terms of the way that her photography has a political underpinning and making people face the realities of people's lives. And, this was related very much also to the AIDS epidemic and the impact it had on her group of friends particularly. But also the film focuses on Goldin's political advocacy, particularly the activist campaign that she kind of forefronts against the Sackler family. Now, the Sackler family are, on the one hand, multi-generational philanthropists, really old money, who donate millions and millions of dollars to, and not just dollars, who donate millions and millions of dollars and acquisitions to the most prestigious art galleries and museums around the world. So we're talking the Tate, we're talking MoMA and the Louvre, Victoria and Albert. And it's not just that they donate. Many of the new buildings and new wings that you will see pop up and new galleries in these prestigious organizations are named the Sackler Gallery or the Sackler Wing. So on the one hand, they do that, but they make their money from pharmaceuticals, and they own Purdue, which is the corporation that produces OxyContin. So obviously, this is one of the drugs that is responsible for the opioid epidemic. So Poitras does an amazing job of weaving together the history of this photographer's career and inserting within that in a way that has this satisfying and well-constructed sort of rhythm, I would say, the activist campaign that she is the driving force behind in terms of getting both the Sackler family to acknowledge the fact that their product causes this harm, but more directly to get the museums and the art galleries to stop taking the Sackler money. And you know, it's really beautifully done in the sense that it borrows from her photo stories that she uses. So it's not just the fact that she has photos up on the wall in art galleries, which definitely happens, but she's very famous for these photo series. So, you know, sometimes when you go in an art gallery, you'll see one picture after another. So it uses those, puts those up on screen, and then gives you the voiceover and the context behind it, the commentary on what these photographs are kind of doing aesthetically and why they were important for photographic art, you know, and the history of art during this period. But then that's woven in with her speaking with her activist campaign group and putting on these direct action campaigns in particular art galleries, which are all really well, you know, it's all really sort of well documented and well shot and really interestingly put together. And, you know, politically, it just kind of reiterates that lesson that the 1%, corporate America, the billionaire class, whatever you want to call them, they're totally able to morally compartmentalize regarding their actions in different fields. So on the one hand, they can, you know, develop philanthropic organizations and develop education programs around art and build great new sites for the display of art. But then on the other hand, they have absolutely no compunction about selling this drug and lobbying and making sure that the use of it is something that they want to promote in order that you know, the sales will be as maximized as they can, no matter what the consequences. They are ruthlessly protective of their own wealth and status. And it's really interesting in the final scenes, not to sort of don't want to give anything away, so close your ears if you want no spoilers at all, but the final scenes of the billionaires going through this kind of Zoom deposition. It's not really a deposition. It's they've lost the case and they've had to settle for I think it was $5 billion or something like that. And to see the sort of Sackler children, who are, you know, middle-aged old people now, sort of not really even squirming. They just sat there impassive as these victims of OxyContin, or the victims' families, kind of give their testimonials about the stories and the hurt that they feel, you know, and still feel, and because of the impact of this drug. And, you know, maybe I'm reading onto it, but I didn't see any flickers of morality. In fact, you just seem to give this sort of sense of being tired of feeling like they don't have to listen to this. So yeah, I think this is the most like impressive piece of filmmaking. I mean, in the sense that it's not experimental. It's actually broken up into kind of chapters, and, you know, it brings together this sort of exhibition style of the photograph, and then you'd get talking heads and the very, very clearly well used, defined tropes and mechanisms of documentary. But the way that Poitras puts it together, you really can see that this is somebody who is completely in charge of her craft. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to try and go see the new Martin McDonagh film. But I'm going to pass you over to Savina now, who's going to talk a little bit about the new Joanna Hogg movie.
Photography is like a flash of euphoria, and it gave me a voice. Once I started sharing the work, it was really heavy resistance, especially from male artists and gallerists who said, this isn't photography. Nobody photographs their own life.
Dance, dance, dance. The photographer, Nan Golden. She's a major name in the art world.
The work was incredibly political. It was about power, and particularly about the power that men have over women and how that power is translated up in society.
100,000 dead! 100,000 dead!
Here we are in the second week of the London Film Festival. It seems like everything's drawing to a close, but it isn't just yet, not yet. And I must admit, I took my time before recording this particular monologue because I just needed more time to sit with the film. The film which I saw 1 week ago exactly. It was Wednesday last week, I think. I just needed to sit with it, to let it simmer, to see what exactly is the best way to formulate my thoughts around it, because I had a strong reaction to it when I watched it. And maybe it's now a good time to say which film I'm talking about. It's The Eternal Daughter by no other than Joanna Hogg. And with every Joanna Hogg film comes a lot of expectations now after the success of The Souvenir 1 and 2. And the press screening was absolutely packed. I think there was a lot of expectations already. I can feel them in the air. And it felt amazing to share this particularly personal piece of filmmaking as a minuscule gem of some sort with so many people all at once, and their own emotional responses were also palpable in the air one way or another. And of course, I was deep into my own familial traumas and also familial joys, I think, watching this film. And it is about the mother-daughter relationship, which I'm very happy it gets so much representation on screen now. And Joanna Hogg is certainly one that can make these relationships materialize in front of you. And for The Eternal Daughter, it's quite important to first note that I joked with Dario about this a bit earlier on, that if 2022 gifted us a gothic horror movie, it was not Blonde, it was The Eternal Daughter. And it might be a bit of a stretch to say it, but I stand behind it because it is very much a genre film by all means. Aesthetically, it borrows a lot from the iconography of ghost stories we encounter again. The protagonist from The Souvenir 1 and 2, Julie, and her mother, Rosalind, whom we've grown to know very well as her support system, although episodically, in both Souvenir films. So this time around, Julie returns as an older woman in her middle age, now played by Tilda Swinton. And of course, this casting is a no-brainer for Joanna Hogg, who has been working with Tilda since forever and worked with Honor Swinton-Byrne, Tilda's own daughter, for The Souvenir 1 and 2. So obviously, casting the mother of younger Julie as older Julie is the easiest decision ever. But more peculiarly, Joanna Hogg decides to cast Tilda again in the role of her own mother, Rosalind. So on the one hand, Tilda continues her journey as portraying Rosalind, but also returns as Julie as well. So this is already hinted in the very first shot in the opening scene, when it's a bit disorienting because you see a woman in the backseat of a car that is Tilda Swinton's character looking out, and then after the cut, you see the same woman, Tilda Swinton's character, but slightly younger, it seems, talking to the driver, so up close. It's a bit disorienting for anyone who hasn't read the plot and haven't seen the casting, though, but I think it's a very good way of giving us an example of what is going to come. So the opening gambit of the film is there already in the first sequence, when the taxi driver very randomly recounts a story about the place that he's driving them to. It's a place that he says gives him bad vibes and is probably haunted because of an apparition that he saw in a photograph. So this very typical start off in a haunted horror film is turned into something a bit more sinister, or at least we're led to think so. The driver is taking them to a mansion hotel where they're supposed to be staying for Rosalind's birthday. And also on this holiday, Julie is supposed to write. She's supposed to finish her script. However, we soon find out that this hotel used to be a huge house or holiday house or a mansion that belonged to Rosalind's family before. And Rosalind herself spent her early years and youth very much in between these walls. So it's a particular layering of memory, time and space that happens, which is not new for anyone who's seen the Souvenir films. But here, with the role of genre, it's elevated and it's really exquisite to see because it has Gothic style with everything from the mist and the protracted time and the strange noises, and the sound mix of this film is heightened to make sure we know what kind of film we're watching. But at the same time, we don't really, because it's not the typical way that you would expect the haunted house to be portrayed. If you think about something of Kubrick's work, you would expect vastness, you would expect maze-like feeling and a lot of corridors to be traversed again and again, the feeling of being lost and being trapped between these many walls and many doors. But here, our perception as a viewer is distorted in a different way because we see a lot more staircases and Julie going up and down these staircases. So that kind of disproportion of what we would expect from an enormous house. And we don't even get the feeling that we're traversing in a labyrinth, even when Julie is taking walks or searching for her dog, the lovely, absolutely lovely spaniel Louis. Louis makes an appearance and he's very loved. So we're only invited to wander around the house or the gardens only when Julie does it, obviously because she's our protagonist. But we soon get the feeling that when she does it out of anxiety. There's no curiosity in her. She's always tense. And this tenseness, this psychological tenseness that she feels has its own material and external form. It takes the form of the rattling of a window, of weird non-sequential sounds for which she complains very early on to the very unhelpful receptionist. Is a young girl who seems to be the only person around at all times, and she seems quite impatient, and we don't get to know why is she being so rude. So the frustration grows and grows even on that in that sense of manner as well, because it doesn't seem like she's very well mannered. Walking around this house reveals something painful, but we don't know why exactly. As the film progresses, we learn to notice the little bits that activate memory. And what's curious here is that it's not Julie's memory, once again in contrapunct to what happens in the Souvenir Part 1 and 2, but it's a foreign memory, it's someone else's memory, it's her mother's memories. Because Rosalind has spent time in that house. Very important things in her life have taken place in her house. But even if it's not revealed in detail, it's quite obvious that Julie is digging for these memories. She wants to know them. And it just got me thinking and asking myself, why is it so difficult to see your own mother cry and to watch her be upset? I got the feeling that probably for Joanna Hogg as a filmmaker trying to make this film, and for Julie as the alter ego of Joanna Hogg as a character in that film, this question was also very important and probably governed the way that their relationship to their own mothers span out. And I can imagine it's a universal feeling because there's almost something childish about the desire to keep your sibling or partner or family, whether it's your son and daughter or your mother or father, to keep them happy, to shield them in one way or another. And that might seem quite infantile on whichever occasion. It doesn't matter if you're the older or the younger or the recipient of that desire. There's also something quite harmful. And I'm not really sure what's harmful about it, but it does build the atmosphere to be very tense and suspenseful. So I was really thrown into the abyss of trying to comprehend how this connection, the connection and the disconnection between mother and daughter is made so palpable and so physically affecting, especially when it's played by a single actor in both roles. So the casting of Tilda as both characters is not only smart, but it challenges the formal elements of the film and how they would work. So obviously, it's just a trick of the trade that you can't put them in a shot together, not for many instances at least. But that small decision necessitated by the casting then transforms their intimacy into something that is very difficult to acquire. So they don't have contact in the usual way as in framing. So by not being framed together, we have that feeling that they're distant from one another anyway. So since they're rarely in a shot together, there is also that possibility of them to interact through conversation. And when that difficulty arises, as in the difficulty to have these conversations about the past, it almost begs the question, how can they connect? How can Julie really understand her mother? And how can her mother really communicate her own subjectivity? So in conclusion, I had a lot of thoughts that were triggered by this film for sure, and the experience of watching it is going to stay with me because of the mixing of genre aesthetics and how deeply that tension and that suspense sinks into that exploration of a relationship that is already at arm's length but still feels unattainable in so many ways. At least that's what I was thinking exiting the cinema, that we can do it. That's the one way we can truly communicate, is by attempting and by seeing the divisions between our closest and us. And maybe what I'm trying to say is that the film is hopeful, as it is about forgetting, remembering, and letting go. There is a certain sense of freedom that comes with knowing that your mom will probably forever be unattainable. And there are many Freudian ways to think through that, and psychoanalysis can say lots and has said lots about it. But seeing it play out in a film within the context of a ghost story, that was truly something that deserves to be seen also with people, I reckon, together. And I would have really loved to see that film with my mom. That's what I'm going to want to say for closing remarks. Yeah, it's certainly sometimes easier to watch a film with your mom than have this conversation about unknowability and unattainability.
So I'm here in the BFI South Bank bar with Christine Molloy and Joe Lawler. Thanks for coming on once again.
Thank you very much for inviting us again.
Yeah, thank you, Dario, and Neil and the Cinematologists. We're really happy to be speaking to you again.
Yeah, it's great because we seem to have an annual catch-up at the London Film Festival, you know, with Rose Plays Julie last time, which we really loved. But The Future Tense is a very different film, of course. And I found it kind of expressly political, maybe even a kind of essay film, if I can call it that. And you've just done your intro for the film that's screening, obviously, here at the BFI. I just wanted to start off with how you feel about bringing a film that's a self-reflexive piece about Irish identity through the lens of Englishness and the journey between England and Ireland, and how that defines life and artistic expression. You know, how do you feel about sort of bringing that film here today to England and screening it now, you know, after all this time?
Well, I suppose when we were editing this, we started to kind of film, write, edit, and it's a kind of a film that's very much made in the edit in an odd way. So there's a kind of a sense that you don't know what you're doing until you've filmed it, brought it back, tried different kind of voiceovers over the images and try different things, and then think, okay, and then go back out again and and back and forth the process goes. So you're kind of watching this unfold try not to kind of be too tidy about it. We're not trying to sweep it all into the center. We just kind of let it sprawl out, and it'll be self-selecting as it goes along. So there'll be much more material that didn't make the cut than would have. And so it's kind of interesting to watch something unfold in this particular way. I guess it's like the writing process where you're not really, well, some writers are clear what their ending is, but some aren't, and we certainly weren't. And so we kind of allowed ourselves to give over to ourselves to the material and let it lead us. Now, in the process of that, you're watching yourself divulge more and more and express more and more, and you think, okay, this is what's required, this is what it wants. But you're not really sure what that actually is like until you've sat with an audience in front of a big screen, because you can kind of feel the impact of it isn't such a big deal when you're watching a small version of yourself on a small monitor, which is what we edited on. So it really came home yesterday, and when we were in Telluride as well. So we're still trying to process, or I'm still trying to process what it really means to give that kind of material over, both from a personal level, but also within this British context, how people are reacting to it.
Yeah, and it would probably be very similar when we screen in the Dublin, when we screen in Ireland at some point in the future. But yeah, we did actually sit down and watch the film on its first screening at Telluride, so its world premiere, and Molly was with us, so the three of us sat in a row, and I was actually quite surprised at how it made me feel. I think it very much changed for me seeing it on the big screen. It felt more personal, more not exposing, because I don't think it is exposing. It's storytelling after all, but with a different attention to how we've approached the storytelling, because it's a much freer form for us to be working in. It's not like sitting down and writing a script for a narrative feature film. This is a territory that we know very, very well from years ago when we used to make live theatre work, and it feels like a comfortable space for us. But I think to have pushed it into quite a personal space in terms of the stories that we tell, particularly the story about Joe's mom, Helen, which is like a part 2 of her story, because we began us in Further Beyond. But to go on that journey and then to see it on the big screen, I thought, oh my God, it's kind of weird on the big screen. We're too big. Like, you know what I mean? It was just it was surprising how it made me feel, and also to be with an audience, because showing a film to an audience for the first time is always both a great thing, a kind of a relief, and then it's also a really traumatizing thing, because your stomach is in knots, and how are people going to respond? Will they like it? All those kind of nagging doubts that you have, and the insecurities of making work and then sharing it with an audience, and you really just wish you're going to share a really, what is going to deliver everything that an audience want. So this film, The Future Tense, yes, it is quite personal, and I would say that it's an essay film, and I would have thought that it's quite straightforward, but I feel from reactions that maybe it isn't, and maybe that's just the way we are, and we just never get it. We like to go on a journey with something.
It's always damning with faint praise now. I mean, I know we're not post-lockdown, but to say something is a lockdown film, I mean, how much of it was dictated to by that, and how much of this was kind of in place? I mean, in the movie you talk about, that there was going to be actors, but in the end you're reading the monologues of yourself. So was that dictated to quite a lot? And did it, do you feel like it changed the movie?
I think it is. It very much is a lockdown film. I don't think it would have forged this identity unless the pandemic actually took place, because I guess once let's say for example we were going to embark on a new process today, anything that happens over the next year or 2 or 3 or 4, however long it takes to make Further Beyond was made in 10 months from beginning to end, this took 4 years, but anything that takes place in that time is fair game, because I guess you as a person can only do and feel the way you're feeling at this particular moment in time in your life. And I guess different kinds of feelings started to surface during COVID. And of course, one of the big things that the actors we had lined up couldn't come over. So of course then we had to step into it. That had a profound impact on everything. And again, I suppose looking back, I'm thinking, I'm sure if COVID hadn't have happened, we would have probably looked at it and went, it's wrong using these two actors. We actually have to do it ourselves. So because we're so cheap, that was really a really convenient thing in the end. We didn't have to pay the expense of getting actors over. So in a way, it grew out of that, and it really galvanized the identity. The sharper edges of the film became much more clear and evident because of COVID, and that dictated the direction that it needed to have taken. In a way, without sounding too crass, we had a good COVID as a result of that. It was like, it was fortuitous. It also bought us a bit more thinking time.
Yeah.
And just on the performance of you two, I mean, it's one of the things that was really interesting to me in the movie. It seemed like, there was a very deliberate, almost self-conscious performance of self in the way that you positioned yourself on screen and the gesturing towards off screen, which, is probably talking to each other. But even that maybe was slightly kind of contrived, not in a bad way, but do you know what I mean? It was like, I'm performing this question to the other person. And then even in the way that you read, it seemed very carefully articulated, let's say. I mean, was that a sort of deliberate thing?
Oh God. When we made Further Beyond, we worked with two proper actors. Right. And actors are really good and skilled at their jobs. And actually we wrote knowing that Alan Howley, who was one of our voiceover artists, would be able to deliver what we had in our minds really, really well, because he's a great performer, and we've worked with him before in our live theatre work. And in a way, Alan and Denise Goff, who's the other performer in Further Beyond, who's a brilliant actress, we're so lucky to be able to work with her. They just make the whole thing so effortless. They're very good at getting, a script, reading it, processing it quickly on the day, and then being able to come off page. So obviously they can't learn it all off by heart, because that would be impossible, but they have a familiarity and they're able to go lines ahead and say them off camera and then land where they need to in the script. And for us it was a nightmare. It was awful. We did a version of it, I think, as Joe said, in December 2020. We recorded the whole thing. It was so traumatizing. We waited an entire year before we even looked at it. We shot it and we refused to look at it because that didn't go very well.
Can I say it's not a criticism? What I'm saying is that it fits in with your interest in almost kind of like the alienating effect of cinema and the construction of film.
No, I agree. I mean, Christine may have found that more traumatizing than me. I'll just point that out. That is true. And actually last night when we were doing the screening, Denise was there in the audience, and we always like to have a little bit of a go at Denise. And I was saying, the skill that it takes to kind of perform that. I said, but actually all I needed was a couple of hours and was fine. There was no big deal at the end of the day, having a little go at her. But I kind of feel it's part of taking material, holding it up, so to speak, as an object, and studying it as if to say, this is not me, it's different to me. So these glasses are not mine, I'm looking at these glasses. So I think it was partly an alienating effect, partly a distancing effect that we would have to kind of bring some distance between us, the material, so the audience. So the material was somewhere in between us and the audience, that we weren't so subjective and so emotionally engaged in the material that we found it difficult to speak or anything like that. And also being able to hold up, personal, delicate material and handle it quite, roughly as well, because nothing should be that carefully and delicately handled. You can laugh at certain things and you can hold it up. So I think it's all part of the process of the performance, and so it was completely thought out and not accidental at all.
And I mean, this is obviously, you've said it's a personal film, but it's clearly it comes out of it seems to me it comes out of an anger of what's going on in the present, which is making you reflect on wider senses of Irishness, but also your own kind of understanding and maybe kind of ambivalence towards different aspects of that. I mean, was it really true that sort of particular political aspects like Brexit and then the way that COVID hit was really sort of starting to sharpen your desire to want to make this film and make these statements about Irishness and Englishness, and then, as a sort of follow-up to that, it must be really surreal sort of putting it out now when with the shit show that's going on, it's even worse, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I would be loath to say that it's a Brexit film, although it is a response to Brexit. It's our personal response to Brexit, which is our reflecting back over the years that we've lived in the UK. I mean, we moved here in the 80s, so we've been here a long time. We have a daughter here. She's grown up in this country. We cover all this in the documentary. She's grown up in London. I always say that to Molly, you are London Irish, you're not English, because there's been times in her life and she's been confused. I said, but you've grown up in England and I haven't grown up in England, and not only have you grown up in this country, but you love it here. I mean, that's her. She completely loves London. Her life is here. That's why the whole thing has been so traumatic. We were all traumatised by Brexit, actually. And to me it feels like a self-inflicted wound, and it's the damage, the repercussions of it are still being felt. It is far from done and over, and so it allowed us to think about, it's the bigger picture of the relationship of England to Ireland, because even though we've made our life here, and I've lived most of my life in the UK, it's not that I have an uneasy relationship. You are an outsider. London is the place in the UK where you can feel most at home and create your own sense of home, because it's such an amazing, diverse city, a holder of so many people and so many points of view, and you can be yourself here. We've lived in England as well, parts of England. We've lived in Cambridge and Devon, and I never felt at home when we lived there in either of those two places, because you then have to engage with what it means to live in England, and it's not something that I've ever that ever really worked for me. And at the same time, although I always refer to Ireland as home, we haven't lived there for a long time, and our daughter has never lived there, and she's got a very particular relationship with the country that we call home, and it's not her home. So it's all very kind of confusing, and I think Brexit made us so sad. That sounds pathetic, and so we wanted to respond to it. Angry, sad and angry.
I think one of the driving forces, I mean, we're always thinking about our position, other people's positions, where people are at, assessing your life, the direction. I mean, it's a constant process. But it's certainly unleashed a lot of anger, and I guess it's the barrage of news and opinion and the polarising effect of it all. Of course, we couldn't be ambivalent about it. We had very strong opinion about it, like everyone else seemed to have. So it kind of did unleash the most despicable attitudes about other fellow human beings. I mean, it's astonishing, still is astonishing, the amount of,
the lack of awareness,
scum that rises to the top. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, this is endless. And as you say, it just keeps rolling on, and it seems to be ever-changing colours into even worse shades of whatever dark material that it's made of. So it's still relevant. It's more pertinent, sadly, than it was. We didn't, one of those things that when you embark on something that might come out of anger, in a way, is a motivating force that is tapping into something that's happening in the contemporary culture right here, right now, you might not know where that's going to land in 4 years' time. I mean, so it's a bit of a dangerous thing to do. So we never used the word Brexit, but we talked about a changing political landscape giving rise to feelings in the sense that this really isn't going to change anytime soon, in the way that it hasn't really changed in America at all that much. I mean, I know Biden is in, but it's those forces are still lurking there, and they absolutely are on the rise here. But I kind of hope that because the shit show keeps getting worse and worse, whether the colonic, we're near the end of the colonic irrigation, and if there's been a bit of a clean out, hopefully, not quite yet, and people are ready for a hard kind of look at themselves and say, actually, this took place. And we allowed this to take place, and in fact we voted for this to take place. That is kind of shocking, but I wonder if those people have the humility to look at themselves.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, this is where I identified with the film. I mean, I'm not Irish, but I'm half Spanish. And just what you were saying there about that sense of when I was a kid being someone with the name that I've got. And, I was never English in that scenario. But then going to Spain, I was the English one. So it's that sense of not having really a sort of sense of belonging that other people seem to have. And then, when this comes along, when Brexit sort of came along, it's that sense of, you really don't have any belonging, please. And it's like searching for a passport, going in trying to get a Spanish passport, and I've got a girlfriend who's Romanian. And it is that anger came up, really strongly, and I sort of thoroughly identified with that. And I wondered actually, just with the use of, again, we haven't touched on this yet, but the one of the themes of the film is the focus on this upper English class debutante called Rose Dugdale, who then became radicalised, and was very sort of activist for Irish republicanism. And I wondered whether that, I mean, apart from serving as a sort of historical link, across some of the effects of the relationship between Irishness and Englishness, it was almost a way that you could kind of say, why are we not all rioting in the streets a little bit more,
Yeah, but she, I think what's interesting about Rose Dugdale for us is this is a woman who faced up to the imperialist past of her own country and looked it squarely in the face and responded in her own way. I think the other thing about Brexit for me is it also pulled back and revealed the lack of awareness and actual effing ignorance that British people have about their own history and their own colonial past, including, the history of their nearest neighbours, Ireland, and the impact of that relationship between the two countries over the centuries. So she is somebody who could have easily remained completely ignorant of it all her life and not bothered to have any awareness of it, but somehow she did the complete startling opposite. She also stepped up and said, I'm going to do something to address this terrible situation, and I'm going to fight on the side of the people I think who are right, which are the Irish fighting for a united Ireland. And so she's very interesting in that way, because the other part of the Future Tense for me is that going back to think about why we left Ireland in the 80s also is about an anger with our own country as well. So it's not just, I guess we're hoping that it's, not that it's even-handed, but I hope that comes across as well. I mean, it's a country that has had wave after wave of immigration for a long time and has let its own people down. I mean, when you leave a country because you feel you have no choice, we were lucky we could come here, and it's that's an endless story for so many communities. And at the moment we've got Ukrainian refugees on the move all across Europe, the UK, Ireland. We need places that we can go, but there's also that, like, if you don't want to go but you find yourself going. I mean, we went for a very positive reason in the end, because we went to university, and it certainly changed the course of our life. But it came out of a feeling that we couldn't stay in Ireland. There was nothing there for us. And we were part of a whole wave in the 80s of young people leaving.
I mean, just to go back to the Rose Dugdale and the militancy, I mean, in a way, I guess the hyperbole over the course of the last 6 years in particular has become much more violent. The language being used, the positions, the stances being used. And then I kind of look at the militancy that was being used back in the 60s and 70s out of frustration. The civil rights movement in America, the anti-Vietnam protests, the anti-internment protests here. And I guess people do that if you feel your back is up against the wall and you've no recourse to any other action. So you look at what's happening in Iran, or look at other kind of countries that are taking place. Think about Extinction Rebellion, the environment. I think people will become much more militant than what they currently are. And so maybe some people feel blocking roads or gluing themselves is too much. I'm thinking that's going to go much more extreme, and don't be surprised when it does, because if you don't start listening and working towards solving those issues, people become more and more frustrated. And so people like Rose Dugdale think, well, violence, whether you agree with it or not, is now the only recourse that I have. The idea of a polite protest, it's like, that's just getting us absolutely nowhere. So that's when people begin to get really, really hard in their positions, because, of course, governments get hard all the time, and they have all those instruments of power like the police and the army. But I do anticipate much more disquiet in the coming years, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think we are, for the first time maybe since the 80s and Thatcher, we are stress testing British politeness, you know what I mean? And that like, oh no, it'll be okay, and shrug of the shoulders type of thing. So just one final question. Thomas More's Utopia kind of runs through the piece, and this idea of imagining a better life being the underpinning of immigrant identity. And again, this may be considered a slight spoiler, so close your ears if you don't. But at the end of the film, there's more of a question than a statement around the idea of, does hope exist? And I just wondered whether, that was the tone that you were going for, and are you still like in a way like me, kind of saying, I kind of hope exists, but I'm not sure,
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that that's the tone that you think you're left with at the end of the film, because that's what we absolutely want, and that's what we're striving for. Yes, I mean, despite everything that we've just said, of course, I remain ultimately very hopeful in the future, because I remain optimistic about people in general. And yes, we're being very badly led at the moment. Yes, it feels like a shit show, but at the end of the day, people are courageous and optimistic, and there's more goodness than bad. And we all want something better, don't we? I mean, that's the feeling that we have. I mean, we couldn't come to a conclusion at the end of the future tense in our own personal life about what our next step might be, or what the next chapter of our life might be. So we kind of failed to reach that conclusion, but we left ourselves poised in a place where we're, still thinking, and it's unfinished business, and I wanted to end in a place where there's a sense that, not that everything will be okay, but there is, it is a more hopeful place. Yes.
I mean, one of the practical things come out, our daughter was saying, let's not move to Ireland, because, then because I'm not going to move there, because, but don't put a flight between, if I ever have a child, don't put a flight in between me and you. And we said, but what if we, instead of moving to Ireland, we were to move to the south of France or something? And she went, yeah, that wouldn't be too bad. So I'm thinking, okay. So it's you just don't want to go to a cold, wet country. It's like, we just want to, which we don't want to go to a cold, wet country either. Christ. So in a way, we were never going to answer that question, should we move back to Ireland? Because, of course, we can't. It's full of indecision. So I guess in the meantime, it's just to have, not unlike you, kind of, you have shared identities across different kind of countries, and that's kind of the juggle that we have to continue to do.
Well, I love the movie. Christine, Joe, thanks very much for coming on the podcast.
Great, Dario.
Thank you, Dario, so much.
Yeah, a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the Cinematologists. I really appreciate it. So this is Andrew Pope. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your output? You know, you've got the website, and is it a podcast as well?
No, it's just the site. I'm what you might call a hobbyist blogger. The site is whitlockandpope.com, and there's a Twitter handle as well. And it's really just the stuff I'm into. So it's mostly cult and horror and that kind of thing. But when the festival season comes around, I get to do all my, art house and international stuff as well.
Great. I mean, you're in the same boat as us in the, there's no editorial, nobody telling you what to do. So it's kind of freeing. But in other points, it would be nice to write for, other titles. Does that ever happen for you?
Basically, guesting on other people's podcasts is when I pass the reins to other people. Yeah, but as far as the site's concerned, there is no editorial control, and I have a little bit of ADHD. So who knows what I'm going to be writing about next? It's in the lap of the gods.
Well, I think, the democracy of contemporary film criticism requires all of that for sure. So how's this year's festival been for you in general? Do you think it's been a kind of improvement on last year? Because a few of the critics I've talked to have said, last year was a bit of a blowout, really. What's your take on this year?
I like last year and I like this year.
Great.
As ever, you never quite know what you're going to get. I always drop a little ranked list of what I'm looking forward to make sure I prioritize the right things. And as ever, some of the stuff I was particularly looking forward to was good, and some of it wasn't. And some of the stuff that was just on the edges of my radar turned out to be amazing.
So we were introduced to each other the other day in the Pitch House's Central Bar by Mary, mutual friend, of course. And it was great because we had a conversation about Inarritu's Bardo. Let me get the title right. Bardo, False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths. And you were one of the few people that I'd spoken to who didn't just automatically dismiss it out of hand as Inarritu, the ultimate narcissist, going, on steroids with this movie. So I don't know, what's your sort of overall take on this film?
I found it to be a mixed bag. I can see why so many people have given it duff reviews. It is the work of a narcissist. Well, and let's put it this way: an egomaniac or a particularly self-interested individual. Basically taking the money available and absolutely having a bit of a wank with it. but that's fine. Yeah. It's very self-indulgent and long, even at its cut down level. I mean, it was almost 3 hours when it first premiered. He's now got it down to just over 2.5. It's meandering, it's all over the place, but I'm up for that. So much of contemporary cinema that is on the festival circuit certainly is in a kind of social realism, social naturalism register, and there's only so many films that you can watch that are in that kind of Mia Hansen-Love, Dardenne Brothers kind of area before you just want someone to go a bit nuts and really indulge themselves and put it all out there. And a lot of it doesn't necessarily work, and some of it does, and I'm up for that. I'm up for that kind of ride.
Yeah, I kind of have to agree, really. I mean, what's funny about a film like this, it's very difficult to avoid the discourse around it. It's a little bit sort of reminded me of Blonde in that sense, where you've got a sort of big-name director who's been given a lot of money. And essentially, again, I don't know whether this is a criticism of the industry or a criticism of the artist, where that sense of editorial reining in just doesn't seem to have happened at all, and somebody's allowed to go out and do what they want. And sometimes you have to think to yourself, as you say, that's great. Just if you've got $100 million and you want to make a film essentially that's about your own insecurities and your own sense of almost unjustness at the way that your type of filmmaking is received by critics or audiences, particularly, I think. that's kind of fine, and go off and do that. But I mean, I think the problem is when a filmmaker like that portrays themselves as the victim, and there's been some really weird comments, about if this is the reaction to the movie is somehow anti-Mexican. I mean, I didn't really understand that at all, because there are some great things about the movie, as you're saying, but there is, like you say, it's meandering, it's too long, it does fall into the stereotypical critiques that people have leveled at Inarritu. And it's funny because in the film he actually tells us about them himself, doesn't he?
Absolutely. And I saw this at a gala screening at the festival rather than a press screening, so we actually came out in front of the screening, and you know that a movie is maybe having a little bit of trouble landing when the director gets up in front of it and tells you how to read the text, which is basically what he did. He got up and said, don't worry about all the stuff to do with the history of Mexico. If you know about that stuff, that's great, but you don't need to. And also don't worry too much about the plot and making sense of the plot. Just allow the moments and the images and the ideas to wash over you, and just go with the tide. That tells me that those are probably the two things that were stinging him a little. People complaining, it's all about Mexican history, but it doesn't really explain it if you don't know. And the plot was jumbled and meandering and so on. And both of those criticisms are valid. I guess he just wanted to make sure that people were primed for that up front, and if they could just look past that rather than obsessing on them, there was other stuff to enjoy. And frankly, there was. This movie is, for all its faults are also its strengths. It is a smorgasbord of thoughts on Mexican history, race in Mexico, indigenous culture versus white culture and identity, and how he himself identifies, because the movie is about a very transparent standing character for the director himself, who is has a childhood nickname of I think Darky. So because and there's a fear that he isn't white, or he has too much indigenous blood in him, and that's frowned upon, or he's treated as not in an overwhelmingly nasty way, but in a kind of jovial, teasing sort of way. People make reference to that in his childhood nickname. So there's all of that. There's a lot of stuff which it definitely comes from a place of privilege. Because he's talking about how he as a director needs to manage his self-image and how he's perceived as a very rich, successful Mexican artist.
But still wanting to be kind of a man of the people at the same time.
Exactly. So it's all of those things. It's very much everything that's on his mind, and he is a privileged individual. So it touches on a bunch of those concerns as well. It's all of that stuff, all mashed together. And then treated through the lens of something like a Jodorowsky, or Buñuel, or maybe even Terry Gilliam, like that kind of freewheeling.
Yeah, it's blurred reality, dream sequences, fantasy smashed into reality, no connecting points between those elements as well.
Yeah. So it's like a surreal cinema of the spectacle. Yeah. It's surrealism through the grand spectacle. Sure. And at certain points, it's even a little bit Zack Schneider, because in its kind of doomy, grand, operatic, Sturm und Drang type spectacle. There's dead ancient Mexican gods crashing down into the city, huge piles of human corpses to climb up. I found that all very Jodorowsky, and he goes for it. Now, there's a lot of movies in this festival which are a young mother on the edge of poverty, struggling with her home life and things of that nature, and that kind of movie can be enormously good, can be an absolute masterpiece. But what you'll never say looking at Bardo is, oh, this is the fourth or fifth movie like this that I've seen in this festival. Yeah. It absolutely isn't. It's the only one playing in this festival that is so expansive and surreal and has this enormous budget behind it. And frankly, there's stuff on the screen that you could only portray if you had an enormous wedge of cash behind it to indulge your fantasies. And frankly, if that amount of money was available to him, then I'm glad that he took it and he made this kind of, grand folly.
Yeah, and where my problem with that lies, and I agree with all of that, and I think that there are certain sequences which are just wonderful to watch, and even the sort of, his usual approach of, using the wide-angle lens all the way through, so you do get this sort of surrealist approach to space. It's not just in the chopping up of the structure, but then, again, it's not one take, but it's special effected as if it was all one take, so it's that Birdman kind of effect. If you like that, that's fine. If you don't, if you think that's self-indulgent, then you'll criticize it for that as well. But I think the issue for me is that sense where you say it's narcissistic, or where one might say it's narcissistic or self-indulgent, is that he's talking about themes that almost as if he's invented them for the first time. This idea of reckoning with imposter syndrome, the idea of the external recognition of the value of his own work, the problems of an artist focusing on their own career rather than their family, that kind of stuff, contradictions in national identity, the cultural exploitation of the poor. All of these things are in there, and he's kind of like the artist at the centre, because again, it is, whether he pretends that it isn't or not, it's semi-autobiographical. The artist is kind of reckoning with all of those things in ways that to me, have been done many times before and been reckoned with many times before. But it comes across as if because the style is so expansive and so much full of spectacle, it's almost as if he's saying, look, I'm doing something amazingly new here with all of this, but he kind of really isn't. It's just the money is on the screen making it look, huge.
Yeah, absolutely, and I do get that. There's a long tradition of artists who are maybe in their mature years making a film about an artist who is going to attend some particular ceremony where he will be lauded, and thinking back over their career. So, Wild Strawberries, Deconstructing Harry, etc., etc. There's a bunch of them, and he uses, I think, that as a jumping off point to explore the various things rattling around in his head, like Wild Strawberries, like Deconstructing Harry, and so on. And it does feel like that process has then kind of metastasized into just and I do have ADHD, so I get this. Every train of thought explodes off in every direction and just keeps going, and he follows everyone as far as he can go, and it's just a higgledy-piggledy jumbled load of thoughts that are ricocheting around his head, and he tries to systemize it and cram it all in, but there's no, until you get towards the very, very end, there's no clear organizing principle. No. And even when it comes in, and there's a kind of degree of quote-unquote explanation, such as it is, as to why the movie is like this, it's pretty thin stuff. But nonetheless, even though it's very disorganized to my mind, even though none of these ideas are utterly fresh or enormously well developed, there's such a passion and excitement and energy to them that whenever the movie drops or seems to lose its way, it will always come back around and give you something new just around the corner. The visuals always strong and fresh. The energy is always there. And like I say, you can't make a lot of films like this. The way it's made, the degree of spectacle, the degree of grand spectacle requires a lot of money, requires someone who has enough cachet to get a film like this made with what was clearly not a whole bunch of editorial control. And when someone is in that position and gets handed that amount of money and just says, I just want to take everything that's inside my head and just Jackson Pollock it all over the screen, that doesn't happen very often. And I think it's I'm just glad this movie exists. For all its flaws, I'm glad this movie exists.
So enjoy the rest of the festival. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.